Immediately after the release of Return of Daimajin in August of 1966, production began on the third and final installment of the Daimajin trilogy. Returning yet again was writer Tetsuro Yoshida, as well as special effects director Yoshiyuki Kuroda and musical composer Akira Ifukube. And just as before, the director's chair changed hands, this time to Kazuo Mori, who, like his predecessors, had experience directing period dramas for Dai Studio. Titled Daimajin Strikes Again, the film was released in Japanese theaters in December of that same year, concluding the trilogy in ways that bring some new and interesting ideas to the table while still adhering strictly to the formula that made the previous films successful. When a woodcutter named Sanpei comes stumbling out of the woods, he reveals that the nearby Arakawa clan has been kidnapping people to construct a base on the other side of the Majin's mountain, home of their ancient god. Determined to rescue the other members of their village, Tsuruchiki, his younger brother Sugi, and his friends Kinta and Daisaku set out on a journey through Majin's mountain, evading patrolling Arakawa samurai and enduring the dangerous wilderness. As the prospects of their success grow slimmer, Tsuruchiki prays to the mountain god to help save his friends and rescue his village. Just like with the second film in the trilogy, Daimajin Strikes Again is a standalone story with no connection to the prior films that sticks to a very specific story and formula. Once again, we are presented with a peaceful village being subjugated by an amoral and tyrannical ruler, and once again there's a building sense of hopelessness that concludes with the utter annihilation of the villain at the hands of the titular Daimajin. But unlike the middle chapter, which felt more like a retread of the first movie more than anything, this film shifts its focus away from the feudal politics and directs its attention more to the commoners, specifically a group of young boys. Naturally, this gives the film a slightly more lighthearted, adventurous feel, which is a refreshing change of pace, especially because it does so without giving up the hard edge that made the other two films so compelling. Indeed, unlike previous films which only featured children in supporting roles, children are the stars here, and upon realizing this, your heart may sink expecting dumbed-down kiddie fare a la the late Showa-era Gamera films. But that couldn't be further from the truth. While yes, this does mean that the film is lighter compared to its predecessors, and it does feature a few moments of slapstick that would make younger audiences chuckle, it is just as violent and dark as the other Daimajin films. The film pulls no punches, putting these kids in danger, and it makes for some dramatic turns that are surprisingly bleak. Basically, while the film may feature kids prominently, it is not a kids' movie, and thus can be enjoyed by anyone. It helps, of course, that the kids here are actually compelling, at least enough to get you invested in their story. All four boys are driven by the simple motivation of saving their families, but are distinct enough so as to leave an impression. Hideki Ninomiya as Tsuruchiki stands out by virtue of being the main protagonist, the unofficial leader whose determination inspires his friends Daisaku and Kinta, played by Shinji Hori and Masahide Iizuka, to join him. There's also Muneyuki Nagatomo as Little Sugi, Tsurukichi's younger brother, who insists on coming with them. All four give decent enough performances, but given how young they are, it should come as no surprise that they don't show a wide range of emotion, which can rob the more dramatic moments of their impact. Also robbed of his impact is the main villain, who is yet another power-hungry warlord. But while actor Toru Abe does what he can to make you despise him, his limited screen time makes him feel like an afterthought, which makes his comeuppance at the hands of the Daimajin less satisfying than it ought to be. It should come as no surprise by now that Daimajin Strikes Again is as much a production powerhouse as the previous two films, and in fact is in some ways even more impressive. The cinematography is gorgeous, utilizing the breathtaking landscapes of the Japanese countryside in a way that conveys both the beauty and the insurmountable reality of the journey the boys are undertaking. The Daimajin is just as an impressive creation as he ever was, even more so this time thanks to a handful of new powers, including the ability to affect the weather, which makes for some even more striking imagery as he goes on what might be his finest rampage of the trilogy. Special effects as a whole are also just as good as previous films, the only noticeable blemish being the overuse of the giant hand prop, which leads to some comically unconvincing shots that last way too long. And of course, Akira Ifukube is as reliable as ever, with his main Daimajin theme still sounding as epic as ever. Daimajin Strikes Again is another great installment in the short-lived Daimajin series. As expected, it isn't quite as good as the first film, but it is a clear step up from the second, mostly because it tries to do some new things. While the core story and plot structure is the same as ever, its focus on the lower class as seen through the eyes of children makes it feel fresh, and does so without shying away from the darkness inherent to the series. Sure, the child actors aren't the greatest, and the focus on their adventure does come at the expense of a truly great villain that makes the conclusion less gratifying. But it makes up for these shortcomings by sporting some of the most visually impressive cinematography and action scenes of the trilogy. It's a fantastic and well-made adventure film that ends the Daimajin series with hints of a bright future that sadly never came to be, which just might be the greatest tragedy of all. For more reviews and opinions on all things kaiju, subscribe and stay tuned to Up From the Depths.